Russia revealed its weak point, its fatal flaw, and this upcoming offensive, which is set to happen as early as next week, is expected to end in April, and it will not be successful. But more about all of this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. And let's go straight to the point and see some most recent footage. And our first video is from long-forgotten, ridiculous Russian propaganda, where we can see the destruction of the very first Leopard tanks.
Kaput!
However, the video is not exactly what you expect to see. This is just Battle Babushka showing the superiority over Western military vehicles. Next we have a video from Moscow, where just a regular Russian driver was listening to Ukrainian song by Verka Serdyuchka, "Everything Will Be Good", and he was stopped by the police and asked to turn it down. Our next video is from the president of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, who is driving his Western car, most probably Mercedes-Benz. I'm not sure if you're a car expert, let me know in the comments which car is this, and he is criticizing the Western countries. What he is basically saying is that by the end of this year, the special military operation will be over, the Western countries will be on their knees, and everyone will be cooperating with Russia, who was right all along. But okay. Because the next picture is from the current Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Alexei Reznikov, holding the very first Leopard tank, which finally arrived to Ukraine. But it's a toy. This is obviously a joke, and as you can see, even these two gentlemen are smiling, the emotion which Russian authorities don't quite often experience. But it was enough for the Russian propaganda to make fun of Ukraine and the Western world. And speaking about Leopard tanks, recently Germany approved sending 178 Leopard 1 tanks to Ukraine. These are the older models of these tanks and they require repairs. That is why the very first batches of them are supposed to arrive to Ukraine somewhere in summer of this year. And those which will be extremely hard to repair will be sent to Ukraine to use as spare parts. And by the way, without a doubt, Leopard 2 tanks are one of the superior combat vehicles at this very moment. That is why recently I was able to find some short documentaries and small video clips showing the capabilities and characteristics of these tanks. And among the most mind-blowing capabilities, at least for me, is this incredible stabilization of the turret. And if you want to see these videos for yourself, I uploaded them on my Patreon, where there is still 1 week of free access. You can find all the useful links down below. But okay, let's get back to the Western countries supplying their military vehicles to Ukraine. Because recently Denmark also announced that they will be transferring their own Leopard 1A5 tanks to Ukraine as well. And then right here we have a video of a ship carrying 60 American armored personnel carriers called Bradley, which is supposed to arrive to United Kingdom already today. And ultimately, here is another Western military vehicle, anti-aircraft tank called Gepard, which has been spotted in Kiev recently. As Western military vehicles are getting closer and closer to Ukraine, this narrows down the window for Russians to launch their offensive. They understand it as well, they are in a rush to do it, but because of the very same fatal flaw which has been next to the Russian army since the very beginning, most likely they will not be successful. And we will talk about this in more details very soon. But another thing which is pretty clear is that Russia is looking for an escalation pretty soon. And according to current estimations and predictions, the next Russian offensive will happen by the end of February, which you might have guessed will be full of events. And of course, I will always be here to report them for you, and if you don't want to miss any of them, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. You can also follow me on Instagram to see how I live outside of YouTube. Alright, and before we talk about the situation in the East and the very first signs of the Russian failures, here are just 3 very quick news. The first one is that the very same Kadyrov, he said that after Russia is successful in Ukraine, the next country to be demilitarized will be Poland. He justified it by saying that Russia must continue fighting against Satanism and Nazis across entire Europe, and the next country will be Poland, which already depleted its resources supporting Ukraine. I don't know about you, but this narrative does not sound like the narrative of liberators. The second news is that according to the representative of the Russian government, Andrei Kolesnik, the death penalties for those people who left Russia and are criticizing Russia from abroad must be returned. And I mean, don't get him wrong. Supporting the invasion, destruction, mass attacks, it means that you're a patriot. But saying that this current conflict between Russia and Ukraine is actually a war, Russia is fighting against another country on their own territory, it's a treason and it is punishable by death. And the third news is that also Russian authorities are thinking to implement the law, which means that if you have been serving in the military, it will be much easier for you to get enrolled into university. What it means is that as soon as you retire from the military, you receive a special document. Upon presenting, you will receive additional points when applying to any university. Alright, and now as promised, let me give you a very quick update from the east. First of all, according to Ukrainian sources, a heavy fighting has been reported next to Dvorichna. At the same time, one of the main concentration of Russian forces was against Svatove-Kreminna road, and heavy fighting has also been reported to the west of Kreminna in this forest area. Speaking about Belohirivka, which Russians claim that they are already able to capture it, as you can see, it still stands. But unfortunately, if we go a little bit to the south, Russians were able to advance a little bit closer to Blagodatnya. Another heavy fighting has obviously been around Bakhmut, but as of today, Russians are not able to encircle this city. And at the same time, Ukrainians were able to repel a Russian attack next to Avdiivka, inflicting big losses to the Russian army. And ultimately, as we go to Vuhledar, a massive attack by Russians has been successfully repelled, and reportedly more than 25 armored personnel carriers and tanks have been destroyed. But, of course, according to the Russian side, everything goes according to the plan. Such as, for example, the most recent statement by the Ministry of Defense of Russia, Sergei Shoigu, who said that Russians are exceptionally successful both in Bakhmut and in Vuhledar, and also they are able to destroy the supplies of the Western vehicles. I have no idea exactly about which supply routes he is talking about, probably this first video about Babushka destroying a paper tank. And speaking about the south, Ukrainians continue their limited attempts to cross Dnipro river. Alright, and before we talk about why this next massive offensive of Russians will most likely fail, let's take a look at this map which shows us the changes in territorial control. And first of all, as you can see right here, Russians were able to advance literally a little bit to the southwest of Marinka. As we get closer to Bakhmut, we can see that Russians also advanced closer to Stupachki. And then, as we go to Krasnohora, we can see that Russians got closer to this settlement. And ultimately, as we go to Belohirivka, we can see that Ukrainians were able to liberate some of its land and also push Russians further away, which completely contradicts previously made statements by Russians. But the main topic of the recent days is this next massive and most likely final offensive by Russians, which is set to happen as early as in February. And the Russian forces, no matter how ridiculous some of their military tactics or decisions might sound, they still learn from their mistakes. Such as, for example, according to the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Oleksiy Reznikov, who is saying that the next offensive of Russians will be more concentrated, rather than Russians trying to attack and invade across entire Ukraine. Reznikov also thinks that Russians at this time will be using more prepared soldiers, including special forces. And according to him, Russians will highly unlikely resume their offensive in Kherson region, because when retreating, they already burned all the bridges. And it all basically means, with high degree of certainty, the next attack of Russians will be in the east. So, what do we have at this very moment? This time the Russian offensive will not be as crazy ambitious. This time Russians will be more concentrated and meticulous in their attacks against selected areas. And because of this, it will be much harder for Ukrainians to defend themselves, or at least until they start receiving Western military vehicles and equipment. The very minimum they have to do until then is to stand their ground and stall this invasion as much as possible. At least once again until spring-summer of this year, where the very first major batches of the Western military vehicles are expected to start arriving. But despite all that, Ukraine still have a pretty good chances, because Russia will most likely perform the very same fatal mistake. Which is the problem of transferring the truth all the way up the chain of command, and as a result, severely overestimating their capabilities. This is pretty much exactly what we've seen in the beginning of this war, where most likely Putin generals, they said to him that yes, the Russian army is ready, we will take Kiev in 3 days, it's not going to be a problem, it's going to be easy war. And as a result of this, Russia attacked all the way across Ukraine. There was not specific goals for any unit, and they were repelled by Ukrainians. This assumption is also confirmed by the Institute for the Study of War, which thinks that this major offensive by Russians will be over in April, and it will not be successful. And the reason they gave is exactly the same, the overestimation of capabilities by Russians themselves. Right now Putin is asking probably the very same generals, are we ready? And the generals, being afraid of Putin, they said, yes, Mr. President, we are ready, we will win, it will take only maybe 1 week this time. And maybe, just maybe, in the very first stages of this offensive, Russia will be relatively successful, but eventually Ukraine will regain its strength. And as soon as Russian offensive slows down, this is when Ukraine needs to seize the opportunity and end this war once and for all. Because unfortunately the support and especially the patience of the Western allies is not endless. Right here, for example, we have one of the most recent polls, which shows that 41% of Republicans are in favor of Ukraine giving up some of its land just so this war can be over. This is just another reason why Ukraine needs to finish this conflict as soon as possible, because Western countries will simply get tired sending money to Ukraine and seeing that nothing much is changing. This might be the hard truth, but unfortunately that's the reality. And eventually, if this war goes on for an extended period of time, the Western leaders might start pushing Zelensky towards some sort of negotiations and peace deals, which unfortunately in pretty probable case scenario might include Ukraine giving up some of its territories. Or another thing which might happen, and it is pretty controversial, but still it was voiced by the ex-advisor to the president of Ukraine, Alexei Arestovich, and he said that Ukraine might become the next North and South Korea. What he meant by that is that Ukraine might be split to Western and Eastern Ukraine, and the Western Ukraine, which will be bigger territory, will be under full support of the Western countries. They will be providing them with the investments, technologies, developments, military support, pretty much everything, just in return for peace. And while this might not be the ideal scenario, unfortunately we do have to take into consideration all the possible ways for this war to be over, even as controversial as this. And no matter what's going to happen, we are definitely witnessing a pretty big part in our modern history. And if you don't want to miss any future historic events, just please once again subscribe to my channel, it only takes 1 click. And if you want to support my work financially, please consider becoming my channel member, use a PayPal link, or become my Patreon, where there is still 1 week of free access. You can find all the other links to the right and down below. Thank you so much for your attention, товарищи, and see you tomorrow.